Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a LatinX writers podcast. My name is Ruben Mendive. We start every podcast with what's your name and how do you identify?
My name is Edgar Pablos, and I identify as a Mexican-American screenwriter-director.
Where are you from?
I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. The first 4 years of my life, we lived in Juarez, and then moved when I was 4 to El Paso.
And, what is it? What's the experience of growing up, basically like straddling the border?
That's right. You have 2 feet on 2 cultures, and it was a trip. I loved it, but there were some moments that you have that want to belong, and sometimes when you're straddling 2 cultures, one becomes more dominant than the other sometimes, and you have to find that balance. And for me, growing up in El Paso, once we moved there, mind you, I was only 4 years old, and the limited Spanish I did know, I didn't know any English. And so going to preschool and kindergarten, that's where I picked up the English and some new friends. And I remember for one of those friends that I made, he had a birthday party and took a bunch of us to see Star Wars. And that was my first movie I ever saw on the big screen. I have... my memory is a little blurred from it, but I do remember loving the movie, and that it was so crowded we had to sit on the floor. That's my early memory of that screening. But it wasn't until the second movie at another birthday party that I remember everything, and that was for Superman. And Superman had a big impact on me. The Christopher Reeve, Richard Donner version.
Those are good first memories to have. And so, what prompted the move to El Paso for your family?
My parents, I was very fortunate that both my parents are college graduates. They were dentists. They've since retired, but they had their clinica in Juarez, and so they serviced majority of Americans because they would come over to Juarez to have their teeth. It was much cheaper there and quality work, and so all their patients were American. So they lived in Juarez, they established there, but my father knew from an early time that he wanted his kids to be educated in the United States, and so that was his goal, to get us to El Paso so that we can be raised there and be educated, and that's what we did. So I was there's 5 kids. I'm the 4th of 5. And that transition was, I think, more difficult for my older siblings. No, I have an older sister. And when we moved here, I was maybe 3, and she's 7 years older than me. So it's exactly the age difference between my oldest sister and me. 7 years. So it's different experiences of coming to this country, of growing up in this country.
Absolutely. And do you know the history of your parents, how they grew up, their parents?
Yes, my father grew up in Sonora, just outside of Obregón, and low income family. His father, my grandfather's story is it's very interesting, and I take a lot from his story, and feel fortunate of where I am today because of my grandfather. My grandfather left Obregón, or outside. It was a town called Quechehueca. When he was 17, and he moved to L.A.
Wow.
And so this was 1920, I believe. Around 1919, around that era, to L.A. He found work here and met my grandmother here. They got married in the church downtown. They even went to their honeymoon in Catalina Island.
Cool.
And they were established a life here. They had 4 kids here.
Wow.
An aunt, 3 uncles, and an aunt. But then the Depression happened, and there's a little bit of history that people don't know about, and I didn't know about it until I was working for MALDEF at the time, about 5 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and they had a ceremony in downtown at La Plaza de Culturas y Arte of an official apology from the state of California, apologizing to the millions of Mexican-American families that were repatriated during that time. And what I didn't know is that my grandparents were deported, mass deportation, even though they had their papers. aunt and uncle were American citizens. They all were deported.
Yeah.
And that was a sad time. No one ever talked about it. And my father was born when they moved back to Mexico. So they had 4 more kids, and my dad was one of those 4 that were born in Mexico. So I keep thinking to myself, what would have happened if my father was an American citizen?
Yeah.
The difference that would have made in a lot of things. And and for my poor grandmother, who was used to indoor plumbing, having to move back to Mexico and living in a ranch with an outhouse in the back. And I can't even imagine that. And then having to raise 8 kids in a ranch, and how difficult that was. So I always think of them a lot during their journey. And my grandfather had, for whatever, I always think of timing for everything. My grandfather had enough money to send one of their kids to college, and it happened to be my father. Not even college, high school, because they didn't have high school there. So he moved to Mexico City to go to high school, and that's where he met my mother, in Mexico City. And they became high school sweethearts. And my grandparents on my mother's side, they were already dentists themselves. So my grandmother was, on my mother's side, was one of the first women dentists in Mexico. And so when they were in high school, my grandfather, my father thought he was going to be an attorney. He wanted to be a lawyer. And my grandfather on my mom's side convinced him, you should be a dentist. Yeah. And he did. And both my mom and dad went to dental school at UNAM in Mexico City. And for a while they moved back to Obregón, and my dad was a biology teacher, but eventually they settled in Juarez because my grandfather had clinics there. And so they established their first clinic there and started practicing dentistry there. Yeah. And we, that's their history. And, and
this is why I love asking about, people's parents or grandparents, is because, first of all, if you know the history of your own family, then that sort of really informs who you are. Like, to be the son of the one son that got to go to high school. Yeah. Like the multiverse and all that stuff. Like, it could have been any other kid. You might not have been here. You would have been living a different life.
Correct. And certainly that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And same thing with it's not rare for Mexicans to be used as a scapegoat in this country. Right. And for you to have a history that goes back, it's because I had only heard of that also when I went to the museum they have down there. Yep. And how, and just thinking of the wealth, the value, the land that was lost to all these families sent to Mexico. And it's a tricky game that when we talk how we experience immigration within our two countries, because for so long, the lines weren't so clear, and also so many things were done to make it so your father wasn't a citizen even though he had every right to be. Yeah. And what happens to the family that did get to stay, again, whole nother life. Right. And again, we have families, we have resiliency, but also our history is made up of policies, governments, and that's something that's not an accident. It's not.
Decisions made by others.
Yeah.
And how it affects millions of people from that policy and that. Yeah. So that decision to deport those millions of families, not just in LA, but the whole country, had an impact on my family.
Yeah. And we can't even speak to the what would have happened to all those families if they had stayed, what the city would have looked like, what the country would have looked like, to have generations of us growing up here.
Correct. Yeah. It really makes you think of how different it would have been. But because of that, it made my dad work harder, and because of his hard work, I'm here speaking with you. Yeah. And I don't pretend to think that I wasn't privileged that way. He paved the way for us. My grandfather paved the way, and I was fortunate that my dad, in his hard work, was able to send 5 kids to college. And so I'm second generation college graduate in my family.
Yeah. And you don't really hear about the second generation college students.
No, not yet. I do a lot of work with the USC Latino Alumni Association. and it's such a rewarding thing to be part of because of the stories you hear of kids, in their 20s and they're being the first generation, first in their families to go to college, and it's so wonderful to see.
Yeah, just got to make sure they're not the last,
Yeah, exactly. And to stay. I mean, that's the great thing with the Latino Alumni Association. They really have a pipeline set up so that they can help those students stay and retain in college and finish out and then go beyond.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's important work. I have so many guests come on, and how even the journey to get to college is difficult, and no one's really looking out or explaining things. And not to mention, once you get there, all the things you don't know.
Exactly. I remember that, applying for financial aid, applying for school, all that stuff. Luckily, I had older siblings that were able to help with that, but a lot of it I did on my own. And I remember flying out here for orientation for USC, and I was literally the only student there without a parent. And that was so intimidating to see that everyone is there with their mom and dad, and I'm there by myself and thinking, wow, what if I'm missing something here? What am I forgetting? And then seeing the bill, as presented to me, this is how much it's going to cost for your first year to attend USC, and freaking out. I didn't even remember that I applied for financial aid, and seeing that bill in front of me and seeing the parents all writing out checks and things like that. And then me moving to the financial aid department and saying, okay, here's your package. This is what you're responsible for. You have this in scholarships and grants, but the rest you're responsible for in loans. And I literally just paid off my loans maybe 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? The same exact thing happened to me. When I went to orientation, I was the only kid there without my family. Yeah. I did not know that they could come, should come. Might have been a good idea for them to be there. Right. Had no idea. Yeah. You don't know what you don't know. And then it's put upon you as a 17, 18-year-old to all right, figure it out. Yeah. But
a lot of that, I think it's protecting our parents.
Oh, for sure.
Because of the language barrier, right? My parents didn't speak English. My mother more than my dad. But you don't want to put them through that agony of not understanding, of not... so you protect them, and you figure it out yourself.
Yeah. Even protecting them from with my family, I took care of all the financial aid for my schooling. I don't think my parents really ever saw applications or bills or anything, because I was like, I know you don't have this. You don't have to even look at it. I'll figure it out. I got it. Right. It's handled. Don't worry about it. But
I think I with them, I remember, let me have your tax returns. That's what I need. I need your tax returns so that I can apply for financial aid.
Yeah.
So
same.
That's exactly what happened. And that's how I was able to get a financial aid package.
Yeah, but luckily you were able to figure it out on your own. Yep. And you didn't make any mistakes. It's very easy to make a mistake and then be short $20,000.
Yeah.
The work we all have to do
just to get there. Yeah. Absolutely.
So let's talk about growing up in El Paso. What's it like growing up? Your family, your siblings, what's the life like? Yeah.
El Paso was a lot of fun. I was fortunate enough with my dad. He loved movies. So we were one of the first families to have a VCR. And so I became a member of a video club at that time. You had to go and rent VHS tapes. And so the weekends, I remember I had an allowance for $5 a week, of being able to go and rent movies. And my job was renting movies for the family. And I would go and pick out the movies, and that's how I was able to educate myself with filmmakers. I started noticing the movies that I like, who the director was. And going back to Superman, I remember loving the music so much that when we got the VHS copy of Superman, I would rewind it over and over again to see the beginning, and I noticed that the last credit before the movie started was the directed by credit. And I remember asking my dad what a director did. And at that time, I was watching so much TV that my dad was trying to get me to read more. He would give me books because I also like the James Bond movies. He gave me the Ian Fleming books to read, and And when I asked him what a director did, he was very smart about it. He said, okay, so pretend when you're reading a book and you're imagining everything that's on the page that the writer wrote down, and you're imagining it in your head. And like, yeah, okay. Well, a director has to put that on film. And that's when I remember thinking, oh my God, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And it stemmed from that conversation. And it wasn't until a couple of years, this was probably around second or third grade when that happened. And then when I was in sixth grade, my older brother was in high school and he had a college day, and he came home and he said, wow, there's a university where they teach you to make movies, film school. And it's a place in California called USC. And that name stuck to me, USC. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. And as I was educating myself with filmmakers that I admired, I quickly realized that a lot of them went to USC. And so I knew that that's where I was going to go from an early age.
Yeah. And it's, it's funny. I had the same thing too. My parents were trying to make me stop watching so much TV.
Yeah.
But it truly was how, there was the storytelling that the medium that best suited us, that we attracted us, that's for some reason spoke to us, and we wanted to sort of be a part of it, replicate it, not really knowing what it was or how, but that it called to us. And I mean, I always say this, like, if we didn't have a TV and I had 10 poetry books, I'd probably be a poet,
Right.
But because there was a TV there and I could watch it for hours, like, that's the way my brain molded to, like, oh, this is how you tell stories. Like, this is what a season is like. This is what arcs are. And, I'm not saying that every kid should be watching all the TV, but it is a great way to, like, learn storytelling, and it's a valid form.
And also it taught me a lot about the American culture, of how to behave in certain ways. And I remember watching certain movies that were funny, and so that I could make friends, I would imitate that and be funny too, and quickly learn to navigate the school system because of those movies and telling jokes and things like that.
Yeah. I do hear a lot of comedians say that, like, they would just see a comedy special and repeat it all back at school.
Yes.
So you have, like, USC in mind. Like, in high school, are you still, like, Mr. Movie? Like, how do people see you?
It's going back to my dad also, because he loved music so much. I joined the band, and I played the saxophone. And that helped a lot with music. Music really informed my love of cinema and music together. And so by the time I got to high school, being in the marching band, there was a friend of mine that had a video camera. And I was able to borrow his camera, and we'd go off and make little movies. And we ran around all over El Paso. And it's a great landscape in El Paso. High desert, mountains, the Rio Grande is there. And sometimes we'd have access to horses and we'd go horseback riding. Cool. And things like that. So it was a great playground. I did develop a reputation in high school that I was the film guy. I was also in journalism, so I wrote a lot of film reviews for the paper. And so definitely people knew that I was the movie guy of high school.
Yeah, and just because it's always in the news, the border. And can you talk about, can you speak to, living in El Paso? Like, what was the relationship with Mexico? What was the relationship with the border?
It was one city divided by a line. I mean, Juarez and El Paso were sister cities. They were one. And the community would go back and forth. My parents went back and forth. They worked in Juarez. They had their office in Juarez, and they would come back and forth. And commerce was like that. It's a huge business. And both communities respected each other, and they would go back and forth. There wasn't an issue. My aunt and uncle had a discotheque in Juarez, and so when I was in high school, I'd go and DJ for them on the weekends. And so traveling the bridge back and forth was an everyday occurrence. And it wasn't until I started noticing as I got older the racial profiling. That would happen when I would cross back, because you didn't need a passport back then. You just say that you were an American. And I remember the tourists that were in front of me would walk in front of me and they say American, and they would go by. And,
Yeah.
when it was my turn, I'd say American, and the guy just looked at me and said, "Oh yeah, well, what school do you go to? What's your principal's name? You know, what's your doctor's name?" Things like that.
Yeah.
You know, that you'd think about, but I didn't know what that was about. And once I answered them and spoke English plainly, I guess they said, "Okay, go ahead." You know, but it made me pause to think about that profiling that would happen to me because I was darker skinned and had darker skin than the people in front of me.
Yeah.
So there was that. My father's greatest fear crossing the border every day, that they were going to shut down the border and he'd be stuck in Juarez and not be able to get home. So there's that element. The violence in Juarez hadn't started at that time, so it was relatively safe. At one point, my father became the director of the Juvenile Detention Center in Juarez for 3 years. It was a post that was given to him by the mayor of Juarez. And so that sobered me to how privileged and lucky we were growing up. Because you'd go over there and see kids our age, you know, that are behind bars because for whatever reason. And it was so hard to see these little kids my age behind bars, and my father really turned that place around. He made it more of a farm where people can actually work and make a little bit of money, and really took care of the kids for those 3 years. So much that he tells the story that years later, when he was coming out of his office in Juarez, he turned his car on and it wouldn't start, and he lifted the hood and his battery was gone. And one of the kids that was a kid at the directory recognized him and said, "Hey, was that your car?" Like, "Yeah, well, I know the guy who stole it. I'll be right back." And he went over there, grabbed the battery and put it in for my dad. It's those kinds of stories that when you live in El Paso and you see literally across the river to Mexico and to see that poverty, it sobers you and you think, my God, I'm lucky to be here. And it makes you think of that privilege, and you don't ever want to take that for granted.
Yeah. Because I grew up in Chicago, definitely an immigrant experience, but nothing where, Mexico was such a removed thing for us. But I remember the first time I went to, what's it called? TJ. It's the first time I had been at the border. And, as a Mexican immigrant, the border is triggering for me. I don't love it.
Right.
I don't just like your dad, I think they're going to close it.
Right.
My U.S. passport weighs very heavy on my bag, and it's a different experience because I didn't want to deal with traffic and all that stuff. We went by foot.
Yes.
So it's a different experience, coming in and going back into the country.
Yep.
But that is what really stood out to me, that, on the Mexico side, the border, the town goes right up to the border. And on the other side, it's I think they have a park or something right by the ocean. And it was interesting, the relationship that this Mexico had to the border that the U.S. did. You saw people talking through the fence. But also what was, it was the poverty, especially standing in Mexico, looking into what is San Diego. And that was the most striking difference. I think it would do, because I know there's poverty in Mexico, and even when I go visit Mexico City, I'm reminded of the wealth that this country has as opposed to Mexico. But when you're standing at the border and you see the difference,
it wakes you up. It really is sobering.
Yeah.
And by the way, growing up in El Paso, Juarez, in my lifetime while I was there, there was no fence. There wasn't. That fence was not built. George W. Bush built the fence. So that was way after I had moved out to go to school. So it was open. It was an open border, really. And you would go back and forth freely. It wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
It was one community.
Yeah.
And I loved that. I loved it. It kept us both afloat because each city was helping the other financially.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, this is something that I've heard of Mexican children coming to the U.S. for school.
Yes.
They go in for the day. Did you have kids like that in your school?
Yes, there was a few kids that would come from Juarez. But when we moved to El Paso from Juarez, my mother did her research of like, where are the best elementary schools? Where are the best this? Yeah. And so when we moved to El Paso, we moved to an all white neighborhood. We were literally the first Spanish speaking family in our block. And so, and during that time, the busing system was happening. So there was an uproar of busing the lower income Mexican kids to our school. And I remember my dad telling the story how he shows up there and people are complaining about the Mexicans coming to this school. And so that gave him pause. But, you know, the teachers were very supportive of that and were very understanding of that. And the other thing that I should add to, at this time in the education system, because there was no bilingual education, we had to sink or swim. We either figure out how to speak English or and luckily we all were able to do that. Yeah. I know that movies helped a lot for me, watching those movies and understanding English. But the biggest culture shock for me moving from El Paso to LA when I came out to school was when someone asked me here in LA if I was a Chicano. And I didn't know what that word was.
We're in the same boat on that.
I thought they were insulting me. I thought they were calling me Chico. It sounded too much like Chico to me. I nearly decked the guy. And I didn't understand it. And the reason I bring it up is because the Chicano movement was instrumental in desegregating El Paso. So I have the Chicano movement to thank for me to be able to go to the elementary school that I went to go to the junior high that I went to, and to not know who they were, and to be taught about Davy Crockett, you know, in 7th grade, and how they defeated the Mexicans, you know, and not knowing who Cesar Chavez was, not knowing who Dolores Huerta was, and not knowing any of that movement. It was infuriating, and I didn't learn that until I came out to SC, you know.
No, I had the same thing. I thought I had heard the word Chicano, and I was like, and I knew it was Mexican related, but I also knew we were from Chicago. So I was like, is it? I don't really know. It wasn't totally clear until I got way too old. But yeah, the same thing, like just even like, I don't know Mexican history, and I sure as hell don't know Chicano history. Like, I don't know any of that because it wasn't taught ever.
And the movies didn't help much because, you know, at that time, what Hollywood was doing was the East LA experience, right, with those movies, and I couldn't relate to any of that, so I didn't know that those aren't the stories that I know of. The only difference I would add is when I saw La Bamba for the first time. I loved that movie.
The touchstone, yes.
It was a touchstone movie for us. 1987 was a great year for Latinos in movies. It really was. It was the year that La Bamba came out. It was the year that The Untouchables came out, and we were introduced to Andy Garcia, you know, and he was a big, important role model to me. And also in the 86, 87 era, we had Miami Vice with Edward James Olmos, who he was also directing episodes. I remember he directed one of my favorite episodes of Miami Vice. And before that, the only other role model I had was Eric Estrada in Chips. That was it.
And you know, that's funny because, you know, La Bamba was big in our household. You know, Selena was big, Tortilla Soup was big, and I'm sure like most white people have never heard of these movies. And
La Bamba, I think, was able to cross.
That was probably like the crossover hit that probably allowed for the others to be made.
Absolutely.
But it is strange how, you know, there's some American films with like Latinx characters that are you like part of us growing up in our households, the VHS is there, the DVD is there, that like the mainstream culture hasn't really heard about. And you know, I get it on this all the time. Like, I've never seen E.T. Like, I've never like, you know,
you've never seen E.T.?
I've never seen it.
Oh my god!
I don't know where I would have seen
it. You were young at that time. I mean,
but also like I haven't seen like I didn't see Star Wars so much later. So, you know, there's a certain school of director who came from the Spielberg, who came from the George Lucas, that I wasn't exposed to, or that Quentin Tarantino that never really got to see growing up, that created a whole generation of directors. But then when I didn't see those movies, they're like, what? How have you not? I'm like, but have you seen La Bamba? And they're like, no.
Right.
Like, have you seen Tortilla Soup? No. So it's like, don't discount the movies I've seen in my experience just because like you're ignorant to these movies, like I'm ignorant to those.
Well, it's the generation. It's a generation thing. You know, my generation growing up in the 80s, it was Spielberg, Lucas. I mean, those Amblin movies of the 80s, that's all we watched. But that was almost like our gateway drug to find
Yes.
other filmmakers, and the video stores helped that. I remember spending hours at the video store. If as an example, Richard Donner, who directed Superman, I would go to the video store and find the toy. Like, oh wait, this is the same director as Superman. I got to check out the toy now, and I would rent the toy. And the next one, oh my God, Lady Hawk. He did Lady Hawk. Okay, let's go to the Lady Hawk. And that's how I slowly started educating myself with these directors, based on the other movies that I liked of theirs.
Yeah, video, and I feel like Netflix has totally drowned out.
Yes.
Like any sort of like selection and like appreciation. It just sort of just binges. You watch it in a day. You forget it ever.
And you have an algorithm that tells you you might like this because you like this. And I guess, to a certain degree, it may work, but there aren't enough titles on Netflix of older movies where you can see classics, where you can see and learn, because those films were my education.
Yeah. I remember because we used to do that growing up. My parents were divorced, and my mom would. Every weekend, we'd go to the video store, and we'd each rent one movie.
Oh, that's nice.
So we'd watch 3 movies every other weekend for like years. So I saw a lot of movies. Were they all age appropriate? No.
Yeah. Right.
But that's also how I saw like my first like Almodovar movie.
Wow.
My mom had I think it was Bad Education had just come out. She saw it at the video store, picked it up.
You watched Bad Education? Nice.
As a kid. Yeah. But I remember watching it and thinking that's the first time I was like, oh, that's like me. Yeah. And not even the director, but just the world. Yeah. People speaking Spanish, like Penelope Cruz in a way I had never seen her before.
Right.
And just being like, it just clicked in my brain that like, not only like was there someone like me in the movie, but like this was like art made for us.
Right.
That you just stumble upon.
For me, it was like Water for Chocolate.
Oh, yes.
When I first saw that movie and thinking, oh my God, this is an art film made by Mexicans.
Yeah, I remember that.
And when I saw that, I was completely blown away.
Yeah.
And then I discovered Miramax had one version of it, and then I saw the original Mexican version that had 30 more minutes of film. And you see, why did they take out those 30 minutes? And it was... a subplot involving the housekeeper that had that I thought was so important to include in the movie, and I was glad that I saw the Mexican version instead of the Miramax version. Yeah, it made a big difference.
Yeah, and also that's how I saw what's it called? What's Guillermo del Toro's the vampire one? Oh,
Cronos?
Cronos.
Yes.
That's how I saw that. Before that, I had seen Hellboy, right. And then when I saw that, I was like, whoa, like. Yeah. Also, like, same actor, also very different roles, from Hellboy to like Cronos, Ron Perlman. But again, it was I wasn't exposed to those sort of like films that it's like they're like it's like growth and like I was just seeing like a lot of Hollywood films, and this is when you see like actual like.
Well, you had also, for me, I was lucky enough, one of my dear best friends growing up was Jewish and came from a family that were generations in El Paso. And so they spoke beautiful Spanish and were, educated, obviously. And so the mother and father were very instrumental in introducing me to books and other movies. I remember the father... came over one day to ask me to make a copy of a movie for him, and he wanted me to sit down and watch it with him, and it was Dr. Strangelove, and I had never seen that. And I sat down with him. I was 13 years old watching Dr. Strangelove, and wow, and then his mother introducing me to Harold and Maude. You have the other generation to educate you and introduce you to certain movies. And in high school, when I was able to drive, outside of El Paso is a town called Las Cruces in New Mexico. And there's a little pocket there of a town called Mesilla. And in Mesilla had a nonprofit movie theater there that would show art house cinemas, international films. And I would go there every weekend, or not every weekend, whenever they would show a new movie. And I was exposed to a lot of great international cinema that way.
Yeah, I remember like one time, because it's so crazy how you just stumble upon these things. And like I remember, like I think my brother or sister had to watch Citizen Kane for like an assignment, and I was just casually sitting on the couch or laying on the couch watching them, and literally like the back of my head blew out because I was like, oh my god, like I was just like so much information, so much like artistry, also so much touchstones to every other movie I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
But I'm like, yeah, but I remember watching it for the first time, being like, what the hell is happening? What is this movie? Like, where? Yes. Have people seen this movie? Like, yeah, it's crazy.
But when you expose that, I also had another friend whose parents were big cinephiles, and I went on a road trip to them up to Wisconsin, and they had a family movie theater that they owned, and so they would recommend movies, and they gave me a list for the summer of movies to watch, and I remember being introduced to Lena Wertmuller by them and other films, and so I just kept educating myself by speaking to people, talking to them, finding out what's your favorite movie, and then making that list and going out and seeing them. Not everyone I liked, but but it was a great education that way.
And it's interesting that you had this passion for it, and then sort of like all the pieces like sort of like got together.
Yes.
So did you had USC in the brain? You go
yes
to USC. It's a whole thing.
It wasn't easy. I didn't go right away after I graduated from high school because I didn't have a high SAT score to get into USC. And luckily for me, and I thank the University of Texas at El Paso for accepting me as a freshman, that I was able to get the grades that I needed and study and learn how to really, study so that I can transfer to USC. And I transferred as a sophomore to USC. I was accepted to the university, but not the film school. So
had you applied to the film?
I had applied to the film school several times. I didn't get in until the third try.
Wow.
And and by that time the third time arrived, I had to declare a major, and I had been taking different classes along the way, and the ones that really fascinated me were my religion classes. So growing up in the Spielberg age, of course, Raiders of the Lost Ark was one of my favorite movies, and I wanted to tell those stories, and I thought, if I'm going to write these movies, they have to come from somewhere, and religions tell the best stories. And Raiders of the Lost Ark took a story from the Old Testament and, turned it into something, fiction, but yet it was compelling and awesome and exciting. And so I declared a religion major before I got accepted into the film program. And then once I got into the film program, I did a double major in cinema and religion. I was able to combine my religion with my film studies in one particular area. I had to do a thesis for a religion class on one of the wisdom books, the book of Ecclesiastes for me. And then in my film production class, we had to make 5 short films. And the last one that I wanted to do a film adaptation of the book of Ecclesiastes in modern times, what that would look like.
Yeah.
And so I had to get my film professors and my religion professors together to allow that to happen, and they both agreed, and I was able to turn in my thesis as a film instead of a paper, and that was great. And so that came in handy. The facilities were incredible. I still remember my first day of class. My major was critical studies, so it was film theory and criticism, and with some production and some writing. But for the majority of it, you're watching movies and you're analyzing them and seeing how they work and what makes a movie, how the architecture, really, if you will, of a film. And I had this, in the first day, it was a 2-hour lecture by Professor Marcia Kinder was her name. And she had this great lecture on 2001. And after the lecture ended, she said, okay, so here's the movie. We have a big treat for you. It's a brand new 70 millimeter print. Enjoy. And the curtains open and open and open. And you see this widescreen coming up. And I'd never seen such a beautiful print before, a beautiful theater. So the facilities were incredible. We watched all movies on film, projected.
That's cool.
I mean, it was incredible because the Warner archives were stored at USC. So there were a lot of those prints that we had, and every professor had access to them, and so they would show them for class. And I watched a lot of new movies that I hadn't seen before projected on the big screen, and it was heaven.
Yeah. And, we sort of spoke to, you still you still like sort of participating at USC, sort of speaking to like the experience of new students coming in?
Yes.
So what, you're part of that now.
Mm-hmm.
Like what part of your experience of that, sort of informed your...
Well, at that time, which I didn't know when I was going through the application of financial aid, I had no idea that the USC Latino Alumni existed. Mm-hmm. I could have gotten a scholarship. And I was really upset that no one told me about it. Okay. I didn't learn about the Latino Alumni Association until, 2007 when I became involved with an organization that wanted to showcase them, and I did a video for an award show about them. And so I became involved that way, and I thought, wow, this is a great organization. It's been around for 40 years, since the 70s, that a group of Latino students decided that there weren't enough Latinos going to USC, and they decided, well, that has to change. And together they, through the president of the university at the time, they were able to match funds so that they have a scholarship dinner every year to raise funds for Latino kids to go to USC, and they've been doing it for 40 plus years now, and it's probably one of the biggest Latino alumni associations in the country, and I'm proud to be part of it. And every year I do videos for them for their gala to showcase an alumni person that that has contributed to the organization and in some way or another, and we tell their story. They honor 3 students, outstanding students who have overcome things that you and I are can't even imagine, and yet managed to get a 4.0 GPA, and still take care of their family. So those kinds of stories that I have such hope for the future, the Latino future in this country, because these kids are incredible.
Yeah. And I know sometimes people speak about a culture shock when they go to college. Did you experience that?
Absolutely. It was a culture shock. The biggest culture shock for me were the size of the burritos. Going into ordering first it's a $5 burrito. Are you kidding? $5 for what? And then you see this huge thing that they put rice and beans, like beans and everything else in the burrito, and lettuce and all of that. And the burritos where I come from, the ITO, they're small. They're little wrapped tortillas, and that's it. And so that was the biggest culture shock. And then the other one was the Chicano conversation that I was telling you about, of not knowing what that was, and the academic part I didn't have a problem with. I felt right at home because I met students that were just like me, that loved movies. Yeah. They were nerds like me, and just we were in our element, and it was so much fun to go to class. And then for my religion degree, reading all these new books and studying the Old and New Testament, different ancient texts that we were also study. It was just fantastic, and it really informed my writing very much.
I'm assuming you graduated from USC.
I did.
And so what was next? What was your plan? What did you do next?
It was funny things that I had been an intern at a production company at 20th Century Fox my senior year, and when I was about to graduate, the 2 producers offered me a job to be their assistant, and so I literally graduated on a Friday, and I started working with them on Monday because their deal at 20th Century Fox ended and they were starting at Disney. So that Monday I showed up at Disney ready to work. And as an assistant to these producers, I was in over my head completely. It was a different culture, a different situation, and it wasn't the right fit. And I didn't last long. My first job, 5 months later, I got fired. And that was humiliating. It was really tough. Now people tell you that it's a badge of honor. You got to get fired in this business, or you're doing something wrong. Yeah. And I really didn't know what I had done wrong, but I was fired. I was depressed, and I remember calling my sister and begging her, "Don't tell mom and dad, because I don't want them to worry." I had just moved into a new condo, that kind of stuff. And of course, she did tell my dad, and my dad called me, and I love my father so much. He said, you graduated on a Friday and started working right away. You haven't had any time to rest. Why don't you come home for a year? And, you wanted to write a script. Why don't you come home and write a script? And don't worry about anything. Just come home. And that was just what I needed. It lifted a huge burden.
Yeah.
And I moved back to El Paso to write a script. And again, the irony of things, I just love the way the universe works. While I was in El Paso researching the script, one of my favorite directors of all time comes to El Paso to shoot a movie. Mm. And I said to him, I got to get on this movie. One way or another, I got to work on this movie. And I tried left and right to try to get in as an extra, as a PA, and I just wasn't having any luck. And at that time, I had a friend that was going to the University of Texas, going through a film program, and he introduced me to the film professor. And once the film professor found out I went to USC, asked me to speak, to her students, and I became friends with this professor. Mm-hmm. So a couple of weeks later, that professor called me and said that the costume designer of the film is giving a tour to the theater arts majors of the school, of the university. Yeah. And so she said, why don't you pretend to be a theater arts major and get on the set that way? Mm-hmm. And I did. And I snuck onto the set pretending to be a theater arts major. I had the laser discs of this director that I admired very much, and the costume designer gave us the tour. And once after the tour ended, I went up to him and said, can you get the director to sign these laser discs for me? And he said, well, what do you have there? And there were the laser discs of all his movies, and this costume designer had worked with this director for years. So he liked that I was a big fan of his. And he said, let me hold them, come back tomorrow, and I'll get them signed for you. So I come back the next day, grab the laser discs, and the costume designer asks a favor of me. He said, my wife and I are writing a script that takes place in El Paso. Will you show her around? So I showed her around El Paso. It was great. They wanted to pay me for the day, and I said, no, you already got the laser discs. We're even. Yeah. But the costume designer was really cool, and he says, no, that, how can I repay you? That was a kind thing for you to do. And I said, well, invite me back to the set. I want to watch this director work. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'll do one better for you. And he called me back the next day. He said, your call time is 5 a.m. You'll be a PA in the wardrobe department. Yeah. And that was my first job on a movie. I had to get fired in Hollywood to come back to my hometown to work with my favorite director on a movie. And because of the kindness of that costume designer, who I'm still friends with, who has since produced a short film of mine, and we're about to produce another movie together, that one job led to other jobs. And I became a set PA. I worked as an assistant director, and then became a personal assistant to directors. And for 10 years after that, I worked on several movies in that capacity. And when was the move back to LA? 11 months after that. Yeah. So sorry. So the script that I was writing at the time was a border story about the border patrol and the coyotes, the people smuggling the kids, the people back and forth. And I was doing research there, meeting with border patrol agents, and I finished the script. The bit of the story that I kind of jumped the gun a little bit is that the few months before I graduated from school, I was flying to El Paso for my cousin's first communion or confirmation, I forget. And on the way back to LA, we land in Phoenix, and John Singleton sits next to me on the plane. And this is one of those crazy stories that you can't believe. But I was on the window. A guy sat in the middle who was with him, or I thought was with him, and then Singleton sat on the aisle seat. And I remember going to ask him, "Are you John Singleton?" And he just looked at me and said, "Nah, man, I get that a lot." And I understood that he didn't want to be bothered. Yeah. This was 1995 around the time, so he had just graduated. He had just done Boys in the Hood. At this point, Higher Learning had just come out. And so he's sitting right there, and he doesn't want to be bothered. So okay, I let it go. And then this guy starts chatting me up, the guy in the middle, and asked me, "So have you seen Higher Learning, man?" And I thought he was trying to set me up. Yeah. Right. And I'll have to be honest, I didn't like Higher Learning as much as I loved Boys in the Hood. Yeah. Boys in the Hood is a masterpiece. But I said, what I think that movie was trying to say is that if you go into college not knowing who you are, they're going to spit you out into whatever they want you to be. And I remember Singleton putting his book down. I was like, "That's it, man. That's exactly what the movie's about." And then I said, "So you are John Singleton." And we started chatting up, and I asked him what he was working on. I think he was working on Rosewood at that time. He was researching it, and he was telling me the idea. I was like, that's great. And then he said, yeah, but this other project I want to do a movie about coyotes. And I looked at it like the people smugglers, like, yeah, the coyotes. And I go, I'm from El Paso. That stuff happens in my backyard all the time. And I said, yeah, but there has to be a religious, thread throughout it. And then I said, well, that's my second major at SC, man. And then the things got a little weird, and then so we changed the subject and we talked about movies. The re-release of The Wild Bunch was happening at the time, so we talked about that. We landed in LA. He wished me good luck at SC because I hadn't graduated at this point, and off he went, and I thought that I would never see him again.
Yeah.
So before I got fired on that job at Disney, one of the producers gave me a screening pass that they had received that they did not want to go to on this HBO movie called Tuskegee Airmen with Lawrence Fishburne. So I go to that screening and bump into John Singleton again.
Does he remember you?
I go up to, hey, do you remember me? I sat with you on the plane. He's like, yeah, man, how are you doing?
That's funny.
And I asked him, so have you written that coyote story? Have you found a writer? And he just looked at me, no, I haven't. Like, come on, man, give me a shot. I'll write it for you. And then he just looked at me, well, do you have an agent? Have you written anything? Are you any good? And I said, no, I don't have an agent. No, I've never written anything. And yes, I am good. And I guess he liked that cockiness and the confidence. And he said, well, call my office tomorrow.
Yeah, always say yes.
Always say yes, exactly. So I call his office the next day, and his assistant wouldn't put me through. And I call the next day, same thing. I called for 2 weeks straight, every day, and annoying the hell out of his assistant.
Yeah.
Right? And then finally, she just couldn't have enough. Like, what is this about? And I'm thinking, I'm being genuine. He asked me to call. This is a script that he wants to write. He's interested in writing. I just want to talk to him about it. He told me to call. I'm calling. And then she said, well, let me put you in touch with our head of development. And so the head of development goes on the phone and said, yes, I did. What can we do for you? There's a lovely gentleman named Howard Hobson. I still remember his name. And Howard answered the phone and said, yeah, John did tell me about this, but you got to understand, Edgar, we can't make a deal with you. You haven't written anything. You don't have an agent.
Yeah. And
I said, no, that's cool. I totally accept that. I'm going to go write the screenplay regardless. I just want the guarantee that you will read it when it's done. That's all I'm asking for. And he said, no problem. Absolutely. I said, great. I hung up the phone, and then a week later I get fired.
Yeah.
And so I go back to El Paso to research that script, and I finished the script, and then that's when I moved back to LA thinking I was going to go to graduate school. I was going to do the Masters of Professional Writing at USC, and I got there the day one and to my writing class, and the professor started teaching the exact same class that I had just finished as an undergrad.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, no, I can't do this again and pay this money, and I already know this stuff. And so I called the costume designer again and said, I'm in LA. I'm looking for a job. Let me know if you can help. And he said, well, I'm about to start this one job for an HBO movie. Why don't you come and interview with the AD? And I go in, I interview with the AD. He was a nice guy. Jeffrey Wetzel is his name. And JP interviewed me, and he said, well, straight up, the only reason you're here is because of the costume designer, Dan Moore. We love him, and that's the only reason you're here.
Yeah.
I can't hire you right now. I got to hire someone's nephew. But I'll keep your resume on file, and I'll call you if anything happens. And before I left, I asked, who's directing this HBO movie? And he said, it's Joe Dante. And of course, Joe Dante, we all know who he is. Yeah. And I freaked out. Like, you mean Gremlins, Inner Space, The Howling? Yeah. You know him? Yes, I know him. And I would love to work on this movie, so please keep me in mind.
Yeah.
And so 2 weeks later, he called me, and he said, I had to fire that someone's nephew.
Yeah.
So I need...
surprise.
Surprise. So I need you for 1 week only.
Yeah.
Your call time is 4 a.m. tomorrow at Gorman. Find out where, find it, and I'll meet you there at Gorman. And so I had to look in the map, and I drive to Gorman. I work a week as a set PA with him. On the fifth day, my last day, the AD comes to me and says, you're driving the director home. And he's tired, so don't talk to him about Gremlins. Don't talk to him about Inner Space or The Howling. Just get him home. And I said, great. So I'm thinking that he's just going to get in the back seat and fall asleep.
Yeah.
But Joe gets in the front seat, the passenger seat, and he's wide awake, and we're driving, and it's a 2-hour drive back to LA. and there's nothing to talk about. I can't talk to him about Gremlins. So I turn on the radio, and there's static because my antenna's broken. And I said, and I was looking around for a mixtape that I had made, and I made a mixtape of film scores, of specifically Westerns, because I love Westerns. It's my favorite genre. And I asked him, do you want to listen to this music? It's Westerns. And he asked, is it Ennio Morricone? I was like, yeah, that's exactly who it is. He said, yeah, put that on. And I put the music on, and we talked Westerns the whole trip. So by the time I got him to his house in LA, the trip went by like that. Yeah. And he asked if I was on for the rest of the show. And I said, no, JP just hired me for the week. This is my last day. It was a pleasure. And he said, no. You're driving me from now on. So I was able to get extended and work as his driver, driving him back and forth, and as a set PA. And that, of course, led to another movie and then a 4, and, so.
I mean, this is like, you can't make this stuff up. You can't. You really can't. And I feel very fortunate. You know, I always think of The Alchemist, right? The Paulo Coelho book that I love so much that I remember sitting in El Paso when I tried everything to get on that movie, and I didn't. And I remember surrendering. I said, I want this. I'm going to surrender and just let it happen the way this book says. If you want something, the universe is going to conspire to help you achieve it. I remember thinking that. I sit down, and that's when the phone rang, and it was that professor saying, pretend to be a theater arts student and sneak in. Yeah. So I've learned that from an early age to really just surrender, let things happen, just wish it and let it attract it. Yeah. And it'll happen. Yeah, I have to do that.
Yes.
I'm clinging for dear life.
Yes, we all are. And it's a reminder that we think that we have to put the horse before the cart, and the way the universe works, the magic is no, the cart always comes first, and we forget that. And that's the important thing, and that's a reminder, of worrying about money, worrying about this. But if you trust and do the work, it'll happen. And if you let go of that worry, it'll help you continue the work. Yeah.
And so, now you're back in Los Angeles.
Yes.
Coincidence after coincidence. Yes. Job after job. Mm-hmm. So what is like the you were mentioning you were working on that script for that year. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious about your writing. Like, what are the themes? What is it? Something you're always pulling from? Are you always telling the same story, different?
Well,
ways?
It feels that way sometimes, that you tell the same story, because they always say you have one story and you retell it over and over again. Mm-hmm. But I'm really drawn to characters who transcend what others expect of them. Growing up on the border, people saw you in a certain light and thought that you could only achieve a certain thing. Yeah. And so I'm fascinated by those characters, and that quote that I just said about characters that transcend what others expect of them, that's not mine. That's John Sayles. I read that when he said that, and it just it blew me away, because that's exactly what I love about the characters that I want to write about. And he writes about those characters. And at that time when I was in college, Lone Star had come out, and I thought that movie captured border life perfectly. And so it resonated with me. So those are the types of characters I like. But I also love, as the director I was telling you about that I love, that I got a chance to work with, is Walter Hill, who's an amazing screenwriter too. Yeah. And he tells these stories are odes to courage, and that also resonates with me. That people are under these overbearing situations, and they have to muster up the courage to overcome it, whatever it is. And that courage and those choices that we make under duress, that's what I love. Yeah. And those are the stories that I gravitate towards.
Yeah, it's a good quote.
Right?
It makes sense. The second you said it, I was like, that truly is what it is.
Yeah. And as Latinos, we know that, because how many times have we been underestimated? How many times have they looked at us, from El Paso, from this border town. Yeah. Can they do this? Can they really succeed in college? Can they really...
Yeah. And, whose nephew?
Whose nephew? Exactly. I got to hire someone else's nephew that didn't deserve it, and yet there they are, the nepotism.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy how they question us so much, but then a call from one person, they're like, oh yeah, I'll have your nephew. Like, why wouldn't I?
Yes, exactly.
But then someone else is like making their case, or just like, well,
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Well, it's a town. They have to trust who they know, right? And it's a circle. So you have to try to get in there as best you can and prove yourself. We're always having to prove ourselves.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of it. And once they see what you're made of, then, they'll hire you again and again and again.
Or, somehow you are seated next to them somewhere in a car, in a plane.
Right. But then someone asked me that. Well, besides being lucky enough to sit next to John Singleton, I answered them, well, would you know what John Singleton looks like?
Yeah.
Would you know who's sitting next to you? So all those years of watching movies and seeing interviews, hearing audio commentary from DVDs and laser discs and things like that paid off. It paid off greatly that I recognized John Singleton. I knew who he was. How many times have we sat next to someone that we don't know who they are?
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw John Sayles once at a bookstore, and I went up to him, because I knew who he was.
Yeah, and it's, sometimes it's odd because you'll see someone like, and then you tell your friend, like, who the hell is that?
Exactly.
But it's like, you don't know.
Yeah, you don't know who that is.
This is crazy.
This is great, yeah.
Yeah, and, because that is something that is important. I think about America's Next Top Model, where Tyra Banks does references to, like, photographers, stylists, magazines. And if the models don't know them, they're like, this is your industry. You should know it back and forth. You should know every name I'm saying. You should know what they look like, because that is also part of the work.
Yes. And also the job that Joe Dante hired me for, I talked to him about Westerns and film scores.
Yeah.
If you can do that, that's a job interview.
Yes.
Whether you know it or not, it's a job interview. So on that 2-hour trip to LA, I didn't know it, but it was a job interview.
Yes.
And I passed because, he recognized that I was a aficionado of cinema and passionate about it. And so he knew that these are the people you want around you.
Yeah.
That actually appreciate cinema, because, that's the other culture shock of working in the industry, that a lot of people don't know movies.
Yeah.
They don't know who people are. They only have a 10-year span of knowledge of movies and not the history of it. And, it's a shame.
Yeah. And you're right. It is a job interview because, it's not super serious. It's not super formal, but people want to work with people they get along with.
Yes.
That are easy to talk to, that they don't, like, no one wants to work with a jerk. No one's purposely trying to hire a jerk nephew.
Correct.
Like, that's how this town also works. It's who you know, but also who you know is, do they like you?
Right.
It's
one thing of that nepotism can get you through the door, but you staying in that door, that's all up to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because that's why the nephew doesn't last, because they're like, I don't want to work this guy.
And with me, it was the costume designer that I had met in El Paso that got me that job interview. So it wasn't me. It was that costume designer's reputation that got me that job interview, and I was able to, stay.
Yeah.
So we all need help getting through the door. It doesn't matter how we get through it, but that help is important, and you better know how to stay in the door.
Yeah. And where did you learn that to talk to someone you admire, just reach out, be very upfront about what you want,
Well, I didn't say to Joe Dante, I want to be a director.
Yeah.
We were genuinely movie geeks, and we were just talking about the movies that we loved. And that was it. There was no agenda to it. Yeah. And I wasn't even thinking about another job. I was just enjoying the moment sitting next to the director of Inner Space and Gremlins, and he has become a mentor to me. He was my graduate school in many ways, that to and from the set, he was so generous. I would ask him questions about, why did you set up the camera this way? What did you do here? Why did you do that? And he was always, even at the end of the day when he was tired, he would open up and be a teacher, and I'll be forever grateful to him for that. Yeah. And he's an amazing director, one of the most underrated directors we have out there. And I go back to my first movie I saw, or the second movie I saw, Superman. Superman had a big impact on me, and years later you analyze it and you realize, especially the moment that I had as a kid, that my older siblings and my mom and dad were born in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And so when we lived in El Paso, they had a passport that said alien resident on it. Mm-hmm. So to me, when I read alien emblazoned across my mother's face, across my father's face, calling them alien, it hurt, thinking, are we aliens? Are we really aliens? But then I looked to Superman, who was an alien.
Yeah.
And that movie, you know, people call it that it's a Christ-like story, but to me, that's an immigration story. That is an illegal alien coming to this country, and it makes me realize that, you know, we can be the super people. We can be that wonderful and great to this country. But imagine all the different Supermen and Superwomen that we're deporting, you know? And yeah, it just gives me pause.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it's because it is a ripple effect, not just for families, but for our own communities.
Correct.
You know, I remember reading that there was, you know, mass deportation in this like meat plant or somewhere in like the South somewhere.
Yep.
And there was a ICE raid there.
Yep.
And the next day, 600 kids missed school.
Yeah.
Because they were too scared to leave their house.
Right.
And it's like, that's just the trauma of that and the fear that spread through that whole community is like,
it's a ripple effect. Right. It does. And we don't realize what it is. And just because we're afraid of the other, you know?
And again, that plant opened the very next day, like nothing happened.
Right. Yeah.
And it's tragic.
It is. But that's why we have to keep telling these stories.
Yeah. Because I always say this all the time. Like, this is our own form of activism. Yeah. Like we just want our stories reflected back to us and to the larger population. So, because it's because we want our truths out there. We want
and then we realize slowly that we're similar in many ways. You know?
Because we relate to like the strangest CGI creatures.
Yes.
Like, I'm sure we could relate to like all Latinx leads, you know?
Right.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when My Big Fat Greek Wedding came out, you know, it was such a big hit and everyone identified with it. And it was a Greek family and we all identified with them. You know, it reminded me of my family. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And it's like, are there a ton of Greek people around? No, we just like, it felt like we had touchstones to like our own Greek neighbors. It's
exactly.
Just like, oh yeah, it's like my family.
Yes.
So do you want to talk about what you're working on now?
Yes. Well, after working as a director's assistant for 10 years, I realized that I wasn't getting any writing done. And I was, you know, and so I quit that job and started writing. I have a writing partner and together we've been writing now for 10 years and been developing these scripts for a long time. We had one optioned that we developed for 7 years. And then it went away. So the rights came back to us. But what we've been able to do to survive is that while we write, we started a production company and we do documentaries for nonprofit organizations, universities, institutions like that, like MALDEF, like I was telling you about. And so that keeps us afloat while we write. And recently, a couple of years ago, I started directing theater. And one of the pieces that I directed for the Fringe Festivals, I turned into a short film that we're finishing up, and it's going to go into film festivals. And then I'm also working on a feature-length documentary on a Mexican-American prop master who I met on that Joe Dante movie, The Second Civil War. He had a fascinating story, is that when the other filmmaker I admire very much is Sam Peckinpah. And I studied a lot of his work and his films. And when I was reading his biography, one name kept popping up. It was this man named Chalo Gonzalez. And so as I read, the first time I saw The Wild Bunch, it was the first time I saw an American movie that portrayed Mexicans in a positive, beautiful light and showed both the good and the bad and the beauty of the Mexican landscape. And when I saw that movie, I knew that this American filmmaker loved Mexico, and I wanted to know more about him. Why does he love Mexico? Yeah. And as I studied him, I realized that it was this guy that helped Sam bring that authenticity to this film. Yeah. And this was Chalo Gonzalez. He found all the locations in Mexico of The Wild Bunch and helped in post-production with the Spanish dialogue. And so I'm reading about Chalo Gonzalez, and then when I'm working on that Joe Dante movie as a PA, I see his name on the call sheet. And I go up to him, are you the same Chalo Gonzalez that helped Peckinpah? I said, yep, that's me. And so we became dear friends, and he started out as a location scout, then became a prop master for many years, and then became an actor when he retired, and a very good actor. He's the Tío Tomás in Quinceañera, if you remember that movie that came out, about 10 years ago, that won all the Sundance Awards.
I remember hearing about that, yeah.
Yeah, and so about 3 years ago, I decided I have to make a documentary on Chalo, because his life is just so fascinating, and it's an interesting parallel between Peckinpah and Chalo, that they were both from Fresno, both grew up separately. One was raised in Mexico, one in Fresno, and yet they came together and were this simpatico team, and brothers, and to see one parallel track of what Chalo did in his life and the other of what Peckinpah did was really fascinating, and the documentary turned into something that I did not expect. And so we're doing the sound mix of that right now, and that'll be hopefully in film festivals next year.
Yeah, that's cool, because I do talk about this a lot of the time, how like we can like sniff out the authenticity.
Yes.
So it's interesting that you watching this film, like something clicked and you're like, oh, like
this is real.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was the first time I ever saw in movies where a Mexican mother gives la bendición to her son.
Yeah.
I've never seen that in an American movie. Everyone's afraid of it, and here we are in one of the most beautiful scenes in The Wild Bunch, where they're singing this beautiful Las Golondrinas song, right?
Yeah.
And the mother is blessing her son, and it's a beautiful moment. I'd never seen anything like that in an American film. Yeah. And Chalo had a lot to do with it,
And it's, I wish it wasn't this rare. I wish we would be like, whoa, like, what's that? Like,
it's exciting. Wow, they got that right. They got the song right. They got the people right. They got the cast right. They got all that right.
They got the traditions. Like, I remember, not like I remember like this was so long ago, but when I went to see Roma.
Yes.
And like just the little stuff that they did at home, where it just reminded me of like my home. Yes. And I love seeing that. Of course, it's a very Mexican movie, so of course I would. But it not be me recognizing that I had not seen it on screen before. So then when I see it, I'm just like, oh, like feels like home.
It feels like home. That your culture, you are being represented in a good way.
Yeah,
that this is a showcase of this is who we are, and to have someone like Alfonso Cuarón in his height of popularity to do a personal film like that. I mean, it was just beautiful.
Yeah, I was, I'd heard that he was making this, and I'm just like, I didn't even know what to picture.
Yeah.
And then when it finally came out, I think when Netflix did like the limited screenings in theaters, I was like, I have to go. Like, I have to see it.
You have to.
Don't even know what it is, but I like the trailer. Do know anything about it. Went to see it, and the whole time just like yeah. And then the movie gets very serious at times, and the whole audience crying. And then just like I remember when I left that movie, or like when I was in the theater, just seeing like white people tearing up.
Yes.
At like the lead character, and just thinking like they see her, and like I see her too, but I see her like I would a regular movie. They see her, and they actually like sympathize with the character. They're in this journey with it. Doesn't matter what she looks like, what language she's speaking.
Right.
And then I remember walking out of the theater and just like feeling like very happy.
Yeah.
But like seeing the crowds leaving and the film is still resonating with them, and I'm just like, I'm like they have a different perception of like Mexico of that time. They have history in it. They have a different like different kinds of Mexicans in it, like class and like indigenous roots.
It's a class movie. It really is, absolutely. But in a beautiful way, because that yes, she was the housekeeper, but yet she was part of that family. Yeah. But yet there was also the line drawn, right, where you are part of the family, but get me a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So it was.
And everyone reacted to that moment.
Right.
It didn't matter.
It didn't matter what it was, And I just thought Cuarón did such a beautiful job with everything in it. I love that movie.
Yeah, I was disappointed because some Latinx folks were like, it was boring, and I'm just like, please, people love it like I love it.
If you saw it on Netflix and on your phone or your tablet, of course, think
maybe that was the choice, because I saw it in the theater just because I was like, I need to.
Yeah, I've had that same discussions with people. Oh, it was just so boring, and
Because they were on their phone.
They were on their phone,
couch.
on their couch, texting while they're watching this movie. And no, you
Yeah.
need to be completely engrossed and without interruptions. And I think an environment with, a crowd and a movie
and a
theater.
shared experience. Because that's the thing, there's great films where you walk out of the theater and you're like, I could conquer the world right now. I could punch a hole through a wall.
Yes.
I feel so like that victory was my victory. We were all champions.
Yes.
And you don't get that at home. Like,
no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why I love going to the movies.
Yeah.
And I realized that for the last couple of years, I've been going more to retrospectives than I've gone to first run movies.
Mm-hmm.
The studio systems haven't been doing those kinds of movies. I feel like I've aged out of the summer movies. Those movies aren't for me anymore.
No.
And I feel sad. I look forward to the fall where those movies that are for the Oscars.
Yeah.
But I do yearn for those kinds of movies.
I mean, the summer movies now are just remakes of the movies from like 20 years ago.
Right.
Also.
Exactly.
So it's like, I have a rule: no remakes, reboots, or sequels.
Yes.
Because I'm just done.
Yeah.
But it limits your options for sure.
Well, it comes down to the decision makers, and this is why I think it's important to have people of color to make those decisions of making movies, because what they know is marketing, and marketing is an existing IP. Everybody wants an IP that already exists because it's easier to market and people know what they're selling.
Yeah.
When you have an original movie, they don't know how to sell it, they don't know how to market it, and therefore why bother? And there you go.
And if you're making the same movies, rebooting them, making sequels to them from the last 30 years, we're not anywhere in there.
Yeah. Of course.
So there's no, we need the new content, the new actors and writers to get fresh new content to put up. Yeah. But there has to be room for that. And right now
and casting is great, but we need casting behind the camera.
Yeah.
For
sure.
And so that we're in charge of developing the story and telling the story and having those authentic moments that we talked about La Bendición in movies and things like that will speak to our culture, and it will relate to others.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I felt that a little bit with Coco and the Chancla.
Yeah.
I feel like they beat us over the head with it. Yes. Like, look, see, that's all anyone would promote, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And I was just like, okay, cool. You got
that right.
You got that right. But also I don't know. It just felt like pandering with the Chancla, and I was like, "We get it, all right, Chancla." Yeah, it just, I don't know. They were too proud of it.
Well, yeah, I get that, but I was a sucker for that movie. I really did.
I bawled my eyes out.
Yes, me too. I loved that movie, and I thought that was great that they did that.
But again, it speaks to who's the team behind it,
right? And who did they hire?
Who did they hire? Who wrote it? Who directed it?
Correct.
I was watching this Katie Couric show where she was talking about diversity and all that stuff, and she lauded Coco for being the highest version of that. Did the best job doing this, and I was like, yeah, but the Mexicans, were there Mexicans involved in this?
Yeah,
they were so part of the Chancla and the cultural references, and they talk about how they went to Mexico City for 2 weeks, but I'm just like, how about we have writers we don't have to send to Mexico City for 2 weeks?
Exactly.
How about we have designers that we don't have to send to Mexico City?
That already know it.
That's already know it. That's the actual style they've grown up drawing.
Right. Yes.
But so bawled my eyes out. But there's more work to be done, and we just can't. An animated movie where we cry can't be enough.
Right.
It has to be from the ground up.
Correct.
And I think I think the Black community is better about that than
absolutely.
We are.
They go to the movies.
Yeah.
But also, the Latino community does go to the movies, but they go to any kind of movie.
Yes.
They're really moviegoers.
Yeah.
And that speaks, going back to the projects that I work on, the films that I gravitate towards more, I'm always thinking of my parents, first and foremost, because when I had to go to the movies, when I went to the movies with them, I only chose movies that didn't have a lot of dialogue because I have to translate for them, right? I have to whisper to them, and people don't want to hear that. So I would take them to comedies and action movies. That's it.
Yeah.
And so I'm very conscious of when I write that it's less dialogue and more visual, so that anyone that speaks a different language will understand exactly what's going on without the need to too many subtitles or
I never thought of that.
Yeah. It's a visual medium.
Yeah.
And so we need to write visually. And if we depend too much on dialogue, you're really leaving a lot of people out.
Yeah. And if you're depending too much on dialogue, like, I don't know how much room there is for nuance and for
correct.
Correct.
For those moments, to me, the moments in movies that I love are the silences, of the look, of this shared look of a
yeah. And ideally that's what good writing is, It's like, you don't really have to, it's show, don't tell.
Right, exactly.
But really, like, show is show,
But then it goes to like that. Once you have that blueprint of the script, then you have that actor, that important actor, whether they are of color or not. Those with color that understand the dynamic of that scene or that gesture, that language.
Yeah.
Then that's going to be a much more powerful reaction.
Yeah. I mean, same thing happens, with our films, with our actors. It's like you can sniff out when like this guy doesn't speak Spanish, has never spoken Spanish.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Why do they have accents? Like,
exactly. And that they make that big faux pas of hiring a Puerto Rican to or Colombian to to be Mexican. They're thinking you have to know that stuff, and you have to know that we're all different, and to celebrate those differences. But yet,
so I want to ask you about any writers you want to shout out. Any, Latinx or not, just any heroes of yours. I feel like we've talked about your heroes.
Yeah.
Or just anybody whose work you've seen that you really enjoy, just out and about, friends of yours, people that maybe I should interview, just anybody whose work you're excited about.
The funny thing that because now Latino talent is coming out, there's a lot that I don't have access to. So a lot of my heroes growing up were not Latino. I didn't have access to them, or didn't exist, with the exception of Luis Valdez, with La Bamba. And so I admire those directors that do reach across the border, like Sam Peckinpah, like Tony Scott, for example, that shot Man on Fire and Revenge in Mexico, and I found those to completely authentic in his choice of casting. But Walter Hill is a big inspiration to me in writing. The author Cormac McCarthy, who spent a lot of time in El Paso and writing about that region, I admire greatly. Guillermo Arriaga, who wrote for Iñárritu for a couple of movies. The Three Burials of Mercado Estrada, that Tommy Lee Jones directed, I thought was wonderful. So very much like Cormac McCarthy. In that sense. And the book that Cormac wrote, The Crossing, had a big impact on me, and it inspired one of my scripts. The idea of journeying into Mexico, to, in the case of The Crossing, it's about a boy bringing a Mexican gray wolf back to Mexico. That's just the start of the story, and then everything that happens while he's in Mexico just turns into something that you were not expecting, and it's beautiful and brutal and just incredible. So those are the types of stories that I gravitate towards, where you mix both cultures. I love multicultural stories. So those are some of the heroes. John Milius was a big one for me too. Growing up watching Conan the Barbarian, there's this great voiceover at the beginning of the movie that it was so colorful, the way he described things, that I remember thinking, that's language, that's beauty, and I wanted to write more like that. And so he was a big influence. I'm excited about Jeff Nichols, the director. He did Loving, he did Mud. Great talent. Really gravitate towards his work. But I'm excited a lot of the women writers, Vida and everything that's out there right now.
They're killing it.
They're killing it. So bravo, and bravo to those that greenlight a movie. Yes, it's East LA, but God, man, it's an East LA that we haven't seen, because then you have the LGBT community represented, and it's wonderful. So those are the ones I'm excited about. I'm excited
for all the shows and rooms that come out of all the Vida writers.
Yes.
And that's what the great thing about hiring an all Latinx room. You're creating the opportunity for other rooms to be created.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to that future, you know?
Me too. Me too.
So this is the part of the podcast where you title your episode. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. So you can add more than one word in there. You can mix them around.
Oh my God, I didn't realize that was the title of it.
Yeah. So anything that encompasses your story, your writing, our conversation, anything that's an identifier for you.
That's interesting. It's transcending borders.
Okay.
I think that's the best way that I can describe it, because it's not just a physical border, but it's also an emotional border. It could be cultural borders. It could be plane borders from this world and the next, supernatural. So anything where we're transcending what we don't see, so that we are able to see them or show people that. I think that describes me. Yeah, transcending borders.
I love it. Yeah, I always like talking to writers that like grew up along the border. You guys are a different kind of breed of people. And anytime I talk to you know, people from there, it's like I feel like a very like calm desert, like I don't know, like
it's spiritual. It really is.
It is.
It is, and the desert is beautiful. I never really appreciated it until I left, because I always thought I wanted to go somewhere green, just green. I want green, and no, there's a beauty in the high desert, and I love El Paso so much. I think it's a beautiful city, beautiful people, and a lot of talent there.
And it's its own like culture too. It's like, and same sort of vibe. Like it's chill. It's like magical. It's like
it is. I mean, going back to magical realism. Yeah, there's that I gravitate towards as well, and definitely the Latin American writers have I guess the authority on that. Yeah. But that is. I think Mexico and Latin America is magical. Yeah. Because we have to, with the harshness of reality, sometimes we use the magic to overcome that and to explain what we can't. Yeah.
And I think Vida does that too.
Yes.
Indeed. Which when I just talked to this with the last guest, didn't really see that till she pointed it out, and I was like, oh, knew that there was magical realism, didn't realize that of course it would be
it's the little girl too, right? Yeah, you have that side story of the girl that may have jumped or not, and